WWE and wrestling more broadly have their own set of unwritten rules that wrestlers need to obey. What happens if they're broken? Keep watching and find out. Almost everyone who shared a locker room with Chris Benoit tells a similar story. The Canadian Crippler was one of the most intense wrestlers ever.
Whenever I'd see him, he would always have like his little cup of, like a styrofoam cup of coffee with the straw in it, and he'd be chewing it and be like, "So you still doing your squats?" Like, yeah, I am. How many, 500? Yeah, that's good. All right, you want to do some? Like he was like always kind of like that intense kind of guy.
This is why Benoit was the one person you did not want to break an unwritten rule in front of. After Chris Benoit's death, WWE hosted a tribute show. During it, Triple H shared a story of what Benoit did to a younger wrestler when the newcomer broke an unwritten rule.
Funny story, there was a young wrestler that showed some disrespect towards Shawn Michaels in the locker room, and Chris took it upon himself. It was not a big deal and nobody was that upset about it, but Chris took it upon himself to teach him a lesson, and Chris made that young wrestler do 1,000 squats in a row. Chris stood next to him and did them with him. He did 1,000 right along with him. He made that guy do 1,000 squats. The next day when that young wrestler couldn't bend his legs, Chris made him do 500 more.
While the outcome of every WWE match is predetermined, winning championships is still a big honor, especially when a wrestler wins a world title. Not only do world champions usually make more money, but it's the company saying that they want this particular wrestler to represent them. As such, there are some unwritten rules that come with being a world champion. One of them is dressing a certain way. In 2009, CM Punk won the World Heavyweight Championship, but he allegedly got in trouble backstage during his title reign. Punk reportedly dressed pretty casually while he was traveling, even though world champions are expected to dress professionally when out in public. The Undertaker, who was WWE's locker room leader at the time, told CM Punk that since he was the World Heavyweight Champion, he should dress better. The Straight Edge superstar talked back and presumably didn't change his travel attire. Allegedly, CM Punk's punishment for this was losing the World Heavyweight Championship to The Undertaker only 41 days into Punk's title reign. This new wrestler got a very painful lesson on why you don't want to break this unwritten WWE rule. In late 2004, Daniel Puder won Tough Enough, a reality competition where the winner received a $1 million WWE contract. Backstage, Puder was not welcomed by most of the wrestlers because they felt he hadn't been in the business long enough to earn a contract, especially one valued at $1 million. However, Puder made things worse for himself. Shortly after becoming a signed WWE talent, Daniel Puder is one of 30 wrestlers who participated in the Royal Rumble match. Backstage, Puder got arrogant and told people because he was in the Royal Rumble, he was in the main event. It's an unwritten rule that wrestlers don't brag about their matches or their spot in the company. It's an even bigger unwritten rule for newcomers to do this. Because of this, Daniel Puder was given a painful lesson. Once Daniel Puder entered the Royal Rumble match, wrestling veterans Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Hardcore Holly gave Puder some hard chops.
Puder's like, oh, man. By the way,
Additionally, Daniel Puder didn't get in a single move of offense, likely to drive home the lesson even more. Being respectful and just simply pleasant to be around is important in any job. However, any wrestler will tell you that working for WWE isn't a job, but a lifestyle. In most cases, wrestlers spend more time with their coworkers than their own families. That's why being respectful backstage is an important unwritten rule, and wrestlers who have broken it have gotten punished in some pretty horrible ways. During a tour, Enzo Amore had gotten on the nerves of his fellow wrestlers. It ultimately resulted in him getting kicked off a bus and forced to find his own transportation. That's not desirable, but Enzo's punishment seems pretty minor compared to what happened to this female wrestler. In the mid-90s, Sunny was one of the only female talents on the WWE roster. While you would think this would play in her favor, Sunny actually made a lot of people backstage upset. She rubbed a lot of her coworkers the wrong way, and she was supposedly cheating on her boyfriend, Chris Candido, with Shawn Michaels. Because of this, Sunny was punished in a pretty disgusting way. At the time, Sunny was managing a tag team called the Smoking Guns, who were feuding with another team called the Godwins. The Godwins characters were pig farmers who brought live pigs and a bucket of slop out to the ring. One particular match between the Smoking Guns and the Godwins saw Sunny get a bucket of slop dropped on her head. Before the match, the Godwins were putting the bucket of slop together and added in some special ingredients.
So I'd made it, took it in the locker room, and all the boys were there, and I said, "Now this is the slop Sonny's getting, nobody mess with it," and I set it down. So about an hour or two later, come back, getting ready to change, get ready. My damn slop bucket's filled up about, I don't know, a couple inches from the top. Well, even Cornette, he said there was 23 different DNAs in that bucket when it went over Sonny's head.
While respecting everyone is important in WWE, respecting veterans is an even more important unwritten rule. For example, when WWE talent are flying on a plane, younger wrestlers are expected to give up their seats to a veteran if the younger wrestler's seat is nicer than the veteran's. When this doesn't happen, it can result in some less than desirable outcomes. In 1999, Jeff and Matt Hardy won the Tag Team Championship, their first title reign in WWE. Michael Hayes, a backstage road agent, had given the Hardys first-class plane tickets as a reward for winning the titles. However, Kane was also on the flight and sat in a worse seat. Since Jeff and Matt didn't give up their seats, they faced some hazing backstage, while Michael Hayes had to pay for Kane's lunch for an entire month. Although, some wrestlers do try to take advantage of this unwritten rule. In 2010, Daniel Bryan was very new on the WWE roster and was getting ready to board a plane. Ezekiel Jackson, who had been in WWE for about 2 years, approached Bryan and said he was taking Daniel's seat since it was nicer than his. However, William Regal, who's been wrestling since the mid-90s, stepped in and said, "Do you even know who you're talking to? This man is like a son to me and has more talent in his little finger than you have in your entire body." Ezekiel Jackson backed off after being called out, but Daniel Bryan still ended up giving up his seat to someone else. By their nature, unwritten rules can be difficult to communicate, and wrestlers sometimes break them without even realizing it. WWE always has a masseuse backstage to help wrestlers loosen up and feel their best. The unwritten rule is that only big-name main event wrestlers get to use the masseuse. Former WWE wrestler and ring announcer Ricardo Rodriguez revealed that at one show, a local female talent was working as an extra. She went over to the masseuse, unaware of the unwritten rule she was breaking. Midway through the massage, WWE's head of talent relations pulled the extra out and informed her she couldn't use the masseuse. However, even main event stars get called out for breaking unwritten rules. When Seth Rollins had recently made the jump to the main roster, he was wrestling a match in Fresno, California. Once Rollins got backstage, he put an ice pack on his neck. Seth hadn't hurt his neck, but he wanted to cool down and take care of his body. However, this was seen as unnecessary since Seth Rollins had only been on the main roster for a few weeks at this time. John Cena approached Rollins and gave Seth a message.
So Cena's standing next to him. He's like, "How many matches have you had on the road?" And I was like, "Oh, 3." He's like, "All right, just checking." And so we all knew what that meant, right?
Likewise, when Summer Rae was new to the roster, Randy Orton called her out for using an ice pack on her foot. Some unwritten rules make sense, but others seem kinda bogus. WWE wrestlers are hired as independent contractors, not employees. The reason WWE does this is that as independent contractors, they don't have to pay for wrestlers' rental cars, hotels, food, wrestling gear, health insurance, and other expenses that WWE usually would have to if wrestlers were employees of the company. The plus side for wrestlers is that they have more freedom because they are independent contractors. Or at least, they're supposed to. It's an unwritten, but very important rule that WWE wrestlers talk to management before working for other companies. When Sasha Banks got offered a role on the Star Wars show The Mandalorian, WWE did not want her to accept it. While legally WWE couldn't do anything, the company booked her on shows when she was supposed to be filming. Ultimately, Banks found a way around it, but another wrestler wasn't so lucky. After spending years in the company, it seemed like WWE was finally ready to push Dolph Ziggler as a main event star. He was the sole survivor in the Team John Cena vs. Team Authority match at Survivor Series, and soon after, he won the Intercontinental Championship. However, around this time, Ziggler had booked some stand-up comedy shows, but hadn't gotten permission from WWE. As punishment for breaking this unwritten rule, Dolph Ziggler lost the IC title only about 3 weeks into his title reign. This next unwritten rule is so important that even wrestlers working in different companies respect it, and that is not using someone else's moves. In 1995, Triple H made his WWE debut. His finisher was a cutter, and it got the job done. The only problem was that another wrestler was already using that finisher. Diamond Dallas Page, who was wrestling for WCW, used the Diamond Cutter to end his matches. Once he saw what Triple H was doing, DDP called up the game and asked him politely not to use that move. The game had no problem with it, and he started using the Pedigree as his new finisher. However, things aren't always this peaceful. Once the Great Khali joined WWE, one of his signature moves was a chop across the chest. There wasn't any issue with this until the Great Khali started shushing the crowd before he did it. This was a problem because that's what Big Show would do. Big Show got upset and repeatedly told Khali to stop doing it, but the Indian Giant didn't listen. Finally, Big Show snapped. After a show, the two met backstage and Big Show and Khali got into a fight. Big Show hit the first punch and a real fight between the Giants broke out. The brawl ended abruptly when, according to Chris Jericho, Big Show tripped over a chair and fell to the ground. The next day, Big Show was ordered to apologize to the Great Khali since he swung first. Khali's response was a simple, "No problem, bro." While that situation wasn't great, another wrestler got it much worse. In late 2004, WWE's most controversial character, Muhammad Hassan, debuted. The character was an Arab American, so of course he was given the camel clutch as a finisher. At the same time, Eddie Guerrero was also using the camel clutch. After receiving advice from a veteran, Muhammad Hassan went to Eddie and asked him not to use the camel clutch. What Hassan didn't know was that Guerrero's family invented the camel clutch. This was seen as disrespectful, and Muhammad Hassan ultimately had to pick up a $2,000 bar tab for all the wrestlers. The crazy part is that Eddie Guerrero wasn't upset at all. He understood that Muhammad meant no disrespect, but in WWE, once you break an unwritten rule, there's no going back. Now, another important part of WWE backstage culture is wrestlers pranking each other. In fact, sometimes wrestlers even pull pranks that appear on TV. To see those, watch this video.